moment it happened is one I will never forget. I was moving slowly through the hallway, my footsteps soft against the worn wooden floor, when I heard voices. At first it was nothing unusual, just the low hum of family talking behind a closed door. But then a single word pierced the air like a knife, freezing me in place. Secret. It wasn't said lightly. It carried weight, almost venom, as though it were the kind of truth that could shatter everything if it escaped. My breath caught in my throat. My hands, fragile with age, began to tremble as if they knew, before my mind could fully grasp it, something devastating was being hidden from me. Not by strangers, not by neighbors, by my own blood. I leaned closer, heart racing so violently it felt like it might leap out of my chest. The air around me thickened, every beat of silence pressing against my ears. The voices on the other side of the door were hushed, but I caught fragments. She doesn't need to know. It's better this way. If she finds out, everything will fall apart. My knees buckled beneath me, and I had to grip the wall just to keep from collapsing. The betrayal wasn't in the words alone, but in the way they carried them. Cold, calculated, as though I no longer mattered enough to be told the truth about my own life. I tried to steady my breathing, but each inhale felt shallow, jagged, as if the very air had turned against me. I had spent my entire life believing family meant safety, trust, an unshakable bond that time or hardship could never break. Yet in that moment, standing alone in the hallway of a house I had once built with love and sacrifice, I realized the bond had been broken from within. The pain didn't come from enemies. It came from the very people I carried in my arms as children, the ones I fed, clothed, and protected. That pain, sharper than any blade, cut through my soul. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to calm the storm inside me. My vision blurred, not from age, but from tears that refused to be held back. How could they? How could my own blood decide that I was not strong enough, not worthy enough to be trusted with the truth? That word, secret, echoed again and again in my mind, each repetition like a hammer striking the fragile glass of my heart. It didn't matter what the truth was in that instant. What mattered was the choice they had made, to conspire in silence, to laugh in shadows, to erase my voice without even asking if I wanted to carry that silence. The house felt different after that. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me with the weight of their whispers. Every smile I saw at the table, every casual word spoken, became suspect. I began to question everything. How many times had they hidden things before? How many truths had slipped past me while I trusted too blindly? The realization shook me to my core. I was not just excluded, I was betrayed. If this story already touched you from the beginning, leave a like so more people can hear it. Because silence, when chosen by those closest to you, can wound deeper than cruelty. And I want to know, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted the most? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes sharing the truth is the first step to reclaiming your voice. My name is Greta. I'm 76 years old, and once I believed nothing could shake the bond of family blood. That belief was the pillar that sustained me through storms, through years of sacrifice, through nights when I sat, awake sewing clothes for my children so they wouldn't feel the sharp edge of poverty, through mornings when I rose before dawn to put bread on the table while everyone else was still asleep. I was not just a mother, I was the foundation upon which the family stood. They came to me for counsel when decisions were heavy, for comfort when hearts were broken, for strength when the world outside felt too cruel. I was the matriarch, the voice of wisdom, the one who carried all the memories, traditions, and unspoken promises of what it meant to be together. When my husband was alive, the family had a center, a gravity that kept us all close. He was strong in his own way, but it was I who held the threads of the household. He provided, yes, but I was the one who transformed provisions into life. I turned paychecks into meals, arguments into lessons, despair into resilience. He used to look at me across the table with a kind of pride that said, "She is the anchor." And I was, until the day I lost him. The day my husband passed, something inside me shifted in a way I could not explain to anyone. Grief is not just absence, it is a tearing, a hollowing, a silent earthquake that changes the shape of everything. Suddenly the bed was too large, the meals too quiet, the evenings too endless. I had always thought of myself as strong, but strength has a different meaning when the one who stood beside you for decades is gone. For the first time, I was fragile. For the first time, I leaned not as the anchor, but as someone in need of anchoring. That was when my dependence on my family deepened. I told myself it was natural. After all, I had spent my life giving, offering, sustaining. It was only fair that now they would hold me up. I thought love and gratitude would be enough to protect me. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I noticed changes. Conversation shifted. Where once they would ask for my advice, now they made decisions in hushed voices in other rooms. Where once they lingered at my table, now they hurried through meals with eyes fixed on phones or each other, as though my presence was more obligation than joy. The house, once filled with laughter and stories, began to echo with silences that felt intentional, weighted, like walls being built around me. It was not just the absence of inclusion, it was the presence of shadows. I could feel them whispering, doors closing quickly when I entered a room. Glances exchanged above my head as though I were invisible. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that grief was distorting my perception, making me overly sensitive. But the pattern was undeniable. Blood, the one thing I thought unbreakable, had turned into something sharper, something that cut instead of healed. The contrast haunted me. I remembered nights when my children as little ones curled against me, whispering secrets in my ear because they trusted me more than anyone else in the world. I remembered teenage storms, slammed doors, and yet always, they came back to me because my voice was the voice of home. I remembered birthdays when the room roared with laughter, when they lifted me on a chair because they wanted me to feel like the queen I had always been to them. And now I was treated like a ghost that haunted the very halls I had built with my hands and my sacrifices. I cannot tell you how painful it is to go from being the center to being the shadow, to go from being the one they sought out to being the one they excluded. It is not just loneliness, it is erasure. I began to feel as if my existence had been reduced to a duty, a body they housed, a presence they tolerated. The very blood I thought sacred was running cold before my eyes, and I was left wondering if perhaps love does not always run as deep as we want to believe. And yet, I held on. I clung to the memories of who I had been, to the pride of knowing what I had given. I refused to let go of the dignity that had defined me for so long, but deep inside, I felt it. The silence was not just absence, it was hiding something. The shadows did not just conceal, they protected a truth I was not meant to see. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. It started subtly, in ways that almost seemed innocent, but as days stretched into weeks, the signs became impossible to ignore. My children, my daughters-in-law, even my grandchildren, people who once could not wait to share their lives with me, began to move differently in my presence. At first it was small, a whisper at the end of a phone call that abruptly stopped when I walked into the room, papers being shuffled quickly into drawers, a silence that settled too fast when I entered the kitchen. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the truth has a weight that presses on the chest long before it's spoken. I began to notice their eyes. That was the first, undeniable sign. Eyes that once met mine with warmth now darted away, meeting each other instead. Glances were exchanged above my head, quick and sharp, the kind of glances that say more than words ever could. I had lived long enough, seen enough, to know what it meant. Something was being kept from me. Not out of protection, not out of love, but out of fear of exposure. Meals became an exercise in endurance. At the table, conversation flowed around me like a river that had deliberately cut a new path, leaving me stranded on dry land. They talked about things I was not supposed to hear, things they thought they had hidden well, and when I tried to insert myself, their voices would falter. Plates would clink louder, someone would change the subject abruptly, or worse, they would act as if I had said nothing at all. The silence was not absence anymore. It was a weapon, a way to cage me without walls. I started to catch fragments, little pieces of conversation not meant for my ears. Words like documents, la decisions, she doesn't need to know, floated through half-closed doors. I saw them pass envelopes between themselves, tuck papers under their arms, when I appeared suddenly in the hallway. My hands would tremble when I noticed, not because I feared what the truth might be, but because the betrayal of being excluded was already too much. When your own blood treats you like an outsider in your own home, it feels like the air itself refuses to fill your lungs. What haunted me the most was the change in tone. Where once they had been warm, inviting, almost eager to hear my thoughts, now their words dripped with coldness, practical and sharp. I became a subject, not a participant. I was no longer Greta, the mother, the grandmother, the matriarch. I was her, she, the person they were managing behind my back. They believed they were clever, that their secrets could be tucked neatly away behind locked drawers and hushed tones, but I felt it. I felt it in the heaviness of their silence, in the way they left me out of rooms, in the way even my grandchildren avoided meeting my eyes as if they carried the guilt of knowledge they were too young to hold. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when it began. Was it after my husband passed, when they realized I was more vulnerable? Was it when I became dependent on them? No longer the provider, but the one who needed help? I replayed every memory, every conversation, searching for the moment when my family shifted from being my protectors to my jailers. The cruelest part was not knowing exactly what they were hiding. It was knowing they had decided I did not deserve the truth. The house, once a sanctuary, had turned into a stage where I played the role of someone too fragile, too ignorant to be trusted. But I was not fragile. I was not ignorant. I was still the same woman who had sacrificed everything for them, who had carried them in my body, who had fought so they would never feel the hunger and shame I once knew. And now, to be treated as though my mind, my heart, my very presence no longer mattered, it cut deeper than any blade. Every whisper, every exchanged glance, every hastily hidden paper built a wall between us, brick by brick. And though no words were spoken directly, the message was deafening. You are no longer one of us. It was in that silence that I felt the most profound betrayal, because words can wound, yes, but silence, it erases. It makes you question your worth, your memories, your very right to exist within the family you gave your life to. I wanted to scream sometimes, to slam my fists on the table and demand, "Tell me what you're hiding." But pride stopped me. Dignity stopped me. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg for the truth. And yet, each day, each moment, I felt myself shrinking, disappearing into the corners of my own home. Not because I lacked strength, but because they were determined to strip me of my voice. Do you think hiding the truth can sometimes hurt more than saying it out loud? It happened on an afternoon that should have been ordinary, a day like any other, with family gathered in the living room. I'd been carrying the weight of whispers, the burden of silences that grew heavier each day. but I thought maybe if I asked directly, if I showed them that I still had a voice, they would stop treating me like a shadow in my own home. My hands shook as I rested them on the table, steadying myself, and I asked, softly at first, "What is it you are hiding from me?" The air froze for a moment, the kind of silence that pierces, the kind that tells you an answer has already been given even before words are spoken. And then it came, sharp, cold, cruel. One of my own blood, my son, looked at me with a face I could hardly recognize. No warmth, no respect, only annoyance, as if my question were an inconvenience. "You wouldn't understand, Mother," he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand, his voice carrying across the room so everyone could hear. It was not just the words, but the way he said them, like I was a child interrupting grown-ups, like my mind had lost its ability to grasp reality. And then, as if the cruelty needed to be punctuated, a laugh slipped from someone else, my daughter-in-law. A short, mocking laugh that echoed like glass shattering. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to another, "She doesn't even know what's going on. She thinks she can still be part of this." I felt every eye turn toward me, not with pity, not with love, but with a kind of cold amusement. In that instant, I was no longer the woman who raised them, who worked with her bare hands to give them a life. I was entertainment. My face burned, and I tried to hold my head high, but the weight of humiliation pressed down on me. I wanted to speak again, to defend myself, to remind them who I was and what I had done for them, but my throat closed. The words choked inside me, and when I finally found my voice, weak but desperate, all I could say was, "I have a right to know." The room erupted, not in anger, but in laughter. Not everyone laughed aloud, but the smirks, the exchanged looks, the rolling eyes. They mocked me louder than any shout could. They did not see me any more as a mother, as a grandmother, as a woman. They saw me as a burden, someone who had lived too long, someone whose thoughts no longer mattered. And hearing those cruel words, "She wouldn't understand," spoken in front of my grandchildren, carved a wound deeper than I can describe. Because in their eyes, too, I saw the flicker of doubt. They were too young to understand, too unprepared to defend me, but their silence joined the chorus that erased me. I sat there, still, while they carried on, speaking above me, around me, through me. I was not part of the conversation. I was its object. And the humiliation became complete when my son turned to his wife and said, in a voice dripping with dismissal, "See? This is why we don't involve her. She always makes things harder." Those words were not whispered. They were spoken loudly for everyone to hear, a sentence of exclusion declared by my own flesh. Do you know what it feels like to vanish while still alive? To have the people you gave everything to laugh at your pain, diminish your worth, treat you as though you are already gone? I felt as though I had been erased from my own story, as though I was standing in a room full of strangers who shared my blood but none of my heart. My chest ached, my vision blurred, and yet I forced myself not to cry, because tears would have been another victory for them, another sign that I was weak, that I was everything they said I was. So I sat, silent, my dignity trembling but not broken. Inside, I screamed. I screamed at the betrayal, at the cruelty, at the laughter that turned me into less than human. But on the outside, I held myself still, because even stripped of respect, even humiliated in front of the family I had built, I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. Humiliation is not just a wound, it is a theft. It takes from you your presence, your history, your right to belong. That afternoon, in the very home where I had once been the pillar, the foundation, I was made into nothing more than an afterthought. And it was my own blood who held the blade. If you believe no one deserves to be humiliated inside their own family, subscribe now for more stories like this. And tell me, have you ever been treated as if your voice did not matter, erased in the very place where you once gave everything? After that evening, when my own voice was crushed in front of everyone, when I was reduced to nothing more than a shadow they thought they could ignore, I withdrew into silence. But silence gave me no peace. It was heavy, suffocating, a weight that seeped into every corner of the house. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself how the very blood of my blood could treat me as if I didn't exist. I had given everything, my calloused hands, my bent back from years of labor, my youthful days, all so they could have a better life. And still, they called me useless, laughed at me, erased the woman I had been. Yet it was in that very moment of despair that something unexpected began to happen. Small signs, almost invisible, that I was not completely alone. The first came one evening when everyone else was busy, talking among themselves, planning things that excluded me, while I sat quietly in the corner. My youngest grandson, the one who always seemed distracted by the worlds of youth, slowly walked toward me. He placed a plate in front of me without a word, but his eyes lingered on mine a second longer than necessary. In that look, I saw something I had not seen in a long time: recognition. The next day, when I went out to the garden, I found a little flower plucked and placed on my chair, as if someone wanted to whisper to me, "I know you're still here. I know you matter." It may seem insignificant, but when the world tries to erase you, even the smallest gesture can reignite a flame inside you. Later, another moment came. I was in the kitchen, moving slowly through the familiar space when I heard footsteps behind me. It was him again, my grandson. He didn't say much, only took a glass of water, but before leaving, he paused for a second. "I believe you," he murmured softly, almost like a secret. And those 3 words, so small, were like a hand pulling me out of an abyss. For the first time in a long while, I felt that someone was on my side. It wasn't the loud defense I longed for at that humiliating dinner, but it was a beginning. It was proof that someone still saw me, that someone still recognized me as more than a burden. I wondered how many times he had watched in silence, holding inside himself the indignation he dared not express in front of the others. The gestures continued. A piece of bread left discreetly at my bedside when I had been forgotten at the table. A quick, shy hug in the hallway, but one that carried the weight of meaning. A firm look when another family member interrupted me, as if he were saying, "I know you're right. I know they're wrong." Each of those small acts stitched back together what humiliation had torn apart. My dignity. I began to believe that maybe I wouldn't have to face that darkness alone. Maybe not all of my blood had turned against me. Maybe, among those who laughed or stayed silent, there was one heart brave enough to stand, sooner or later. I held on to that hope the way someone grips a rope in the middle of a current. And it's strange how even the smallest act of kindness can completely transform a shattered heart. It wasn't just the food he brought, not just the hugs or the looks. It was the confirmation that I still existed, that I still had value, that my story was still remembered. Because when others try to erase you, the deepest pain is not just exclusion, it's the fear that you lived in vain. In those quiet, shared moments, I realized there was still space for truth to rise. Maybe I didn't need to scream. Maybe I just had to wait until someone, with the courage of youth and the purity of a heart, not yet hardened by cynicism, would decide to raise their voice for me. And when I thought of that, when I felt that, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but now there was also a spark of hope, a light where there had only been darkness, and it was that spark that gave me strength to keep going. Strength not to be crushed by cold laughter, by disdain, by cowardly silence. I began to believe that the moment of truth would come. Because if a grandson had the courage to say, "I believe you," even in a whisper, then it was only a matter of time before that whisper turned into a cry no one could ever ignore. Have you ever been defended by someone when you thought no one cared? The silence in that house had become so suffocating that even the walls seemed to carry the weight of secrets. I had been erased from conversations, my presence reduced to a shadow in my own home. Yet that fragile thread of hope, the kindness of my grandson, kept me standing. I thought it would end there, with small gestures, stolen moments of quiet support. But I was wrong. One evening, as the table filled again with voices, with laughter that wasn't joy, but sharp, cutting mockery, something shifted. I saw it in his face, the tension he could no longer contain. He had carried the weight of truth too long, and the time for whispers had ended. It began with a folder, a stack of papers that I had never seen before, but that seemed to burn in his trembling hands. He had found them, hidden away in a drawer where my name should have mattered, but was buried like dust. He stood there, his voice shaking at first, but growing louder, as if he drew strength from every heartbeat. "She deserves to know," he said, his words slicing through the room like thunder. "You can't erase her voice." The table froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, eyes widened, faces stiffened. My children, the very ones I had raised, shifted uncomfortably, their carefully built walls of silence starting to crack. My grandson placed the papers on the table with a thud that echoed louder than any shout. And in that moment, the truth I had been excluded from burst into the open. It was about the house, my house, the one built with sweat and sacrifice, the one my husband and I had poured every coin and every dream into. They had already planned to strip it from me, signing papers in silence, preparing to move me as if I were furniture to be discarded. My name had been brushed aside, my history erased from the very foundation I had built. The air grew thick, voices tried to deny, to explain, but my grandson stood taller, his voice unwavering. "Don't you dare pretend she doesn't deserve to know. Every brick of this house is her. Every memory inside these walls is her. You cannot sell her life as if it belongs to you." His words were not just defense, they were justice. A storm breaking open the silence. I sat frozen, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. For years I had been told I was too old, too tired, too irrelevant to be part of decisions. They had silenced me at the table, laughed at my pain, humiliated me in public. And now in the voice of a boy they thought, too young to matter, my own voice came back to life. He wasn't just speaking for me, he was me. Arguments erupted, excuses spilled. It's for her own good. She doesn't need to worry about these things anymore. She wouldn't understand the legalities. Each excuse, each dismissal, was another knife in my heart, but they were dulled by the fire in my grandson's voice. "She understands more than you ever will," he said firmly, "because she built this family while you only reap what she planted." For the first time in years, I felt my dignity pulse back into my veins. My silence was no longer my prison. It had become his weapon. Every time they tried to talk over him, he raised his voice higher, not in anger, but in truth. He looked at me with eyes that said, "I am here. You are not alone anymore. It wasn't just the house that came crashing into the light. There were whispers of money moved without my knowledge, documents signed as if my name were an inconvenience, conversations about sending me away to a place where I would be out of sight, out of mind, and all of it spilled from the lips of the people I had trusted most. But it was my grandson who made sure none of it stayed hidden. I watched my children shrink before him, caught in the light of their own betrayal. And as I sat there, shoulders trembling, eyes burning, I realized something. The voice I thought had been stolen from me was never gone. It had been waiting for this moment, for this defender, for this eruption of truth. My words had been buried, yes, but not dead, and now they echoed louder than ever, carried on the courage of someone I thought too young to fight. In that instant, I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the ghost at the table. I was alive again, my truth undeniable, my dignity undeniable. And it was not because I shouted. It was because he did, and his voice became mine. Have you ever seen someone risk everything just to defend the truth you thought no one cared about? If this moment of justice made your heart beat faster, click like so this story can reach even more people. The night after the revelation, silence no longer felt like a weapon against me. It felt like a balm, a space where I could breathe again, though the weight of what I had heard still pressed on my chest. The truth had shattered me, yes, but it had also set me free. I sat in my room, staring at the walls that had once carried the laughter of my children, the warmth of holidays, the echoes of love that built this house. Now those walls felt cracked, not from age, but from betrayal. My own blood had hidden a truth from me, conspired in whispers, erased me from decisions, treated me as if my existence no longer mattered. But in that same darkness where I thought my voice was gone forever, a single light had risen. My grandson, the one who refused to let my silence become my grave. I thought of him as I folded old letters, smoothed out photographs, ran my fingers over the faces of people who had once needed me more than anything. I remembered staying awake through long nights, rocking babies, stitching clothes when money was tight, cooking meals from scraps to make sure no one went hungry. Every sacrifice, every tear swallowed in silence had been for them my blood. And yet, when the years piled on me and my hair turned grey, they saw me not as the foundation that had built them, but as an obstacle, a shadow to be pushed aside. That was the pain that cut the deepest. Not strangers, not enemies, but my own blood. And yet, when the storm came, when the truth needed to be spoken, it wasn't them who gave me back my dignity. It was the one who should have been too young to fight, the one they underestimated. My grandson looked at me, not with pity, but with fire. He raised his voice when mine had been stolen, and through him I remembered who I was. That night I made a silent decision. I may not have gold to give, I may not have fortunes to divide, but I still have the power to choose where my legacy goes. Every story, every memory, every piece of what I have left. It will not go to those who plotted in shadows, those who thought I was too old, too fragile, too irrelevant to deserve the truth. It will go to him, to the one who saw me, who stood for me, who reminded the world that I am not invisible. I sat in stillness, but inside me there was peace, the kind that comes when dignity returns after being stripped away. The betrayal still hurt, like glass lodged deep inside a wound, but over it there was a calm acceptance. I could not change what they had done, the lies they told, the secrets they buried, but I could choose how my story ends. I could choose who carries my name forward, and so I imagined the future. Not the cold faces that had silenced me, but the one bright voice that restored me. I imagined my legacy being more than just papers or possessions. I imagined it being the courage to speak, the will to stand tall, the proof that truth cannot stay buried. That is what I wanted him to inherit. Not just what I own, but what I am. And you, listening to my story right now, what would you do in my place? Would you forgive your own blood for keeping a secret that shattered everything you believed in? Or would you give everything, your trust, your legacy, your love, to the one who gave you back the truth? If stories like this make you reflect on family and justice, subscribe now so you won't miss the next one. And remember these final words, the ones that will stay even after the screen fades. My own blood kept a secret. But truth can't be buried forever. when everything feels broken, when betrayal comes not from strangers but from the very blood that runs through your veins, the soul is tempted to give up, to believe that love and truth were illusions all along. But let me tell you something. Betrayal does not define you. Silence does not erase you. Lies do not diminish the truth that burns inside you. What defines you is the voice you refuse to let die, the dignity you refuse to surrender, and the courage that can rise even in the final chapters of life. I thought my story had ended in shadows. I thought the secrets kept from me had stripped me of everything that once made me strong. But life has a way of sending light where darkness thought it had the last word. That light came through my grandson, and his voice reminded me that every single one of us carries a legacy that no lie, no betrayal, no silence can destroy. You may feel forgotten. You may feel invisible in your own home, in your own family, in your own life. But your worth is not defined by how others treat you. Your worth is eternal. It comes from the sacrifices you made, from the love you gave, from the storms you endured when no one saw your tears. And sometimes it takes just one voice, one brave soul who refuses to let you fade, to awaken that truth again. Faith teaches us that the truth is like light. It may be hidden for a time, but it cannot be buried forever. It always finds a way to break through the cracks, and when it does, it sets the captive free. That is what happened to me. My own blood tried to bury the truth, but the truth rose louder than their silence. And now I carry peace, not because everything is healed, but because I know I still matter. Because I know I was seen. Because I know I was defended. And in that defense, I found strength to keep standing, to keep speaking, to keep believing that no life, no matter how old, no matter how disregarded, loses its value. If you're listening to this, maybe you too have faced silence, lies, or betrayal. Maybe you too have felt erased by people you trusted most. But let this story remind you, your voice still matters. Your truth still matters. And sometimes the very pain that tried to bury you becomes the reason you rise higher than ever before. So walk with dignity. Choose peace. Give your legacy, your trust, your love to those who prove themselves worthy, not just by words, but by standing beside you when everyone else turned away. Because in the end, justice is not only what the world gives you, it's the decision you make to honor your own worth, no matter who tries to silence it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the power of truth and the courage to rise even after betrayal, click like so this message can reach even more people who need it. And don't forget to subscribe because in the next video another story will unfold. One, filled with pain, courage, and a turning point that might just mirror the struggles in your own life. Stay with me because the journey is far from over. Every story carries a new seed of reflection, a new spark of strength, and maybe the next one will be the voice you need to hear to keep going.